So our seminar, yeah, we're going to do it, so just make sure that everybody understands. Just in case. Хорошо, пока мы ждем, while we're waiting. First of all, I want to meet you guys. I know the first row is all Indiana, the second row is Indiana. Missouri.
Yeah. Missouri.
Missouri.
St. Louis, though.
Minnesota. Missouri. Well, welcome to Indiana. I'm glad you could come and join our church. Hopefully the conference went so good so far. No complaints, except the bathrooms maybe. But didn't anticipate this problem, but it is what it is. Okay, while we're still waiting, so my name is Leo Cadoo. The reason I end up with Leo is most people in high school could not pronounce Leonid. And so I try to help them out, right? I said, well, how about we just lose the half of the word, just stay with Leo. And they said, okay, we can do that. So I kind of stuck with that, and the nickname Leo the Lion, Leo this, Leo that, kind of stuck. So that's how I ended up with Leo Cadoo, and I embraced it. And if you ask those that work with me, most of them will not know my full name, but they know me as Leo. So Leonid, Leonia, Leo, whatever is more comfortable for you. I'm okay with all of those. So, okay. Come in.
That's it. So.
Somewhat maybe I'll repeat myself again, but again, for those that have not heard, my name is Leo Cadoo, Leonid Cadoo. So Leo, Leonid, any of those will be fine with me, will not be offended. Again, a little bit about me. I have a wife and 4 children. My oldest is a daughter, she's 18 years old. And then I have 3 boys. He sits in the back. And then I have 2 younger kids at home, Caleb, 11, and Matthew, 9 years of age. I moved to the United States when I was 12 years old. I graduated from high school here in Indiana. Went to college for a couple of years. Ended up working in a wood factory, and I have been there ever since for the last 23 years. And God has blessed me tremendously. Never dreamed of when I was your age. You know, my desire was just to get a job at $10 an hour and I would be set. Maybe some of you that's thinking that today, you know, if I can just get a $20 an hour job or $25 an hour job, and that would satisfy all of my cravings. I would tell you that God's got things better for you, right? And I was thinking extremely shallow when I was your age, and I was hoping to be in a seminar like this, and hopefully when you're done here, hearing me speaking for a long time, seems like for an hour, you can go home and say, you know what, I've had something, took a lesson, and maybe I can inspire you in some ways. I'm going to back up a little bit. We moved or immigrated to the United States at 1993. I was 12 years of age, and 2 months before we left, my father died at 47 years of age. And I'm the youngest in the family. The move to the U.S. was difficult for me personally. I was extremely outgoing person, and I needed to be on the streets. I needed to play soccer and be involved. And can you imagine moving to a country where you can't speak a word of English, into a city that had no immigrants at the time, Syracuse, New York? I struggled, right? But even in that, God had a plan, right? And so I'm going to stop there and dive into our topic today, and I will continue kind of interject into my story from personal life as well. For about 10 or 11 years, I was youth pastor in this church. So you guys heard of Daryl yesterday. He was leading our church, and we have a few more individuals that along with Daryl have took over and they're doing a great job, and they've planned a lot in this seminar, and I'm looking at it as fruits of some of my labor, right? And so I'm very grateful that God allows me to see that, right? Because sometimes we work so hard, and we think we're making an impact, right? For those that serve in a certain way, right? And you're thinking, man, I'm making all the sacrifices. I stopped doing what I wanted to, and I'm doing this, I'm volunteering there, I'm giving up my time here, and nobody ever says even thank you, right? And then sometimes God allows it, like opens up a small window of somebody comes up and says, hey, you really inspired me, or hey, you know, what you did was what I needed, right? In some ways you impacted my life, and you go, God, thank you, because I needed that, right? You needed to see some of the fruits of your efforts that you put in. And so, again, God gives me that opportunity today as I look at the next generation that's coming behind me to see some impact that potentially, hopefully, in some ways I had in their life as well. Okay, so, diving right in. It's a little crooked, but come on, guys. It's a little crooked, but you guys can see. How did I come up with this topic? You know, spiritual investor. It really wasn't the original topic. Spiritual investor is kind of something we came up with Antoine just so we can present, right? But the main goal is investor versus consumer mentality. To me, it's extremely relative topic. Consumer investor. Consumer investor. And hopefully by the time we're done discussing this topic, you will identify yourself with one or the other. Right? And obviously, go ahead.
Can't you be both?
Well, we are both.
Yeah.
We are both. But the thing I want to really focus on is it's a lens that you look at life. Right? And when if that lens is out of balance, it potentially causes problems.
So you're saying that one could steer towards closer to the other?
Correct. So if you're consumer focused, right, you have a certain lens that you look at things differently than if somebody is investor focused, right? But yes, we are both, and we live in a country where consumerism is everything, right? I mean, we talk and we look and we go to any store, we look at any, you watch TV, right? I mean, it's in front of you all the time. Buy this, get that. This is a better product, and we buy products all the time, and there's nothing wrong with it. The problem is that consumer-driven lens we bring with us to our relationships, into our youth group, into our church setting, right? And so it potentially creates issues and problems that when I was listening to this and I go, this is so relative today. It was relative for my life, right? And so I want to share what I've learned in my life with you guys tonight. One of the verses that I want to pull up there is Philippians 2, 3, and 4, and we will also continue further, 5, 6, and 7 in the next slides. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, rather in humility value others above yourself, not looking to your own interest, but each of you to the interest of others. I mean, think about this for a moment. Think if you take this verse, and if it becomes a reality in any group setting. When I'm talking about investor and consumer, I'm not talking financial investment. So if you thought we're going to talk about financial investments, you're in the wrong group, right? I'm not against financial investment, and I love them myself. And they have done, and you can do well in it, but that's not priority for me, right? And so if you think we're going to learn about the next Amazon or next Tesla investment, you're in the wrong group. I really want to talk about something that can be lasting and fulfilling beyond just the financial gains, right? And again, and there's nothing wrong with financial gains as well. They're done correctly. But think about this. If this was true, I looked at my life. I looked at my relationship. I look at our youth. I look at our church, right? Like, think about if everyone looked out for interest of each other, right? And not put themselves first. How many arguments we could save, right? How many problems would not start if everybody looked through this lens, right? And so I want to start there, and let's continue. Why mentality? You ask the question, well, we're a little bit of both. We are consumers and we are investors, yes. But I want to say don't get out of balance. And so mentality, it's a characteristic, attitude of mind, or a way of thinking of a person or a group, right? a habitual or characteristics mental attitude that determines how you will interpret and respond to situations. Okay? Lens, a person looks through, or a mindset. It's interesting, you know, there's a saying, right? When you see a glass half full or half empty, two people can look at that glass and one will see half empty and one will say it's half full. Well, what dictates of how you're going to look at that, right? And so I want to look at that here. The mentality is a person's, is more like a processor. We can look at the same thing, but take away different results from it, right? And so, is the glass half full or glass half empty? So, Philippians, continue in Philippians, in your relationship with one another, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus, who being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in a human likeness. Like, if you're talking about someone that we could look up to, obviously it's Jesus. And his mentality of being investors into people's lives is amazing. Now, he himself had a mindset, right? And we are called in Philippians to have a mindset similar as Christ Jesus, who being in a very nature God did not consider equality with him. And so, in other words, don't think about yourself more than you should. Like, don't put yourself as priority, right? Which it happens in life. It happens a lot of times in life. And so, it's really a contrast. If you look at Isaiah 14, and when it's talking about Lucifer, right? And Lucifer, he's the angel that was fallen. He says, and Isaiah writes, you said in your heart, I will ascend to heaven above the stars of God. I will set my throne on high. I will sit on a mount of assembly in the far reaches of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High. We say, well, that's not me. But we act sometimes like it, don't we? I mean, in reality, we act sometimes like we're the most important thing on earth. You know? And this is really what I want to highlight today. When we talk about mentality, how do you view things? You know, when you come into a group, let's take your setting. Let's take your youth group per se. That's something that's relative to you. And you see all the shortfalls, shortcomings in that group. How do you view that? Do you view that as a problem and you don't want to be there? Do you view that as, you know, it's somebody else's fault? Do you view that as, you know what, maybe I can help some way? This is really what I'm talking about. You know, sometimes you hear of people or youth or kids, adults, you know, they come in the setting and you go, you know what, it's boring. It's totally, I don't even want to go there. Like, you guys do things that aren't fun, and I go there and I don't get anything for myself. I don't learn anything. I go home, I don't take anything that's relative to me, and really I'm just wasting time. That's one way of you looking at it. The other way of you looking at it is you can come in and say, all right, I can see that problem. I can see the shortfalls and the shortcomings, but how can I help? Right? And it's really, I want you to think about it. Like, when you look at something that's negative that you come in contact with, it could be something as simple as, you know, a relationship, you know, a friendship within friends. And I'm not talking about, you know, women-men relationship or boy-girl relationship. I'm just talking as friendship, right? There's friendship sometimes when the lens or the mentality of individuals always wants to be served, it gets kind of difficult, right? You know, the simple way you can say, well, you know, let's say that individual always wants to be picked up at a certain time. You know, no, it has to be this way. It has to be on this time, and it has to be, otherwise I'm not going, or I'm not doing, right? And so this is really what I want to highlight about, that it's not about us. I want to inspire you to invest and humble yourself, right? To be a solution, to help, to build, right? And really that's what I want to talk about. So the next slide really separates the investor versus consumer. And this was kind of eye-opening to me. So I was in a conference, Iron Sharpens Iron for Men's Conference, and this presentation was brought up, and I thought, you know, I never thought about it this way. Right? So if you look at investor, if you boil that down, who is an investor? It's someone who brings the value up. You can look at it even in a financial world, right? If you invest into something, they had more money, in essence, right? If you put your money into a business, the business takes your money, and per se, they have capital, right? If you bring it down to what we're talking about today, a spiritual, relational investor, it's someone who looks for ways to be helpful. It's someone who's unselfish, and it's someone who puts others first. In other words, an investor in our settings brings the value up. It makes the group better. It makes the youth better. It makes the church better. It makes relationship better. That individual, you want to be associated with. You're not a burden, right? You're not that negative person who always points out what's wrong with that group or what's wrong with that church. That's not you, right? Consumer, it reduces value. We can start simple. You buy a car. You drove on it for a month. You probably can't, well, maybe today is not true. Today you may be able to sell it for the same price or more. But historically, it's been true, right? If you buy something and it's used, you can't get your value back. If you buy a pair of shoes and you work for a month, you can't sell it for the same price you bought it. It's not possible. So consumer, it reduces value. And what we're talking about today, again, is someone who's selfish, who makes it all about you. It has a desire to be served. That's a big one. Consumer mentality is the guy that, or a gal, that's somebody that wants to be served in only that way. Interesting that consumer, and we talked about that we live in a consumer-driven society. One thing, what happens with a consumer mentality is they become extremely good critic. It's that individual that always knows how to do things better. Have you met those people? Have you met somebody who always knows how to do it better? Like, no matter what happens, it's never good enough because they know how to do it better. Right? So, when we go to a restaurant, what do? We pull up an app, open table, whatever, and we look how many stars it has. And if it has not enough stars, more likely we won't go there, right? Somebody has rated that restaurant, a consumer, and says, I'm going to allow 5 stars, 4 stars, whatever. We can do that in any purchases, right? We look at the ratings, we look at the feedback. We look what people are writing about it. And there's nothing wrong with it. The problem is when it becomes into a group, when it comes into a church, it comes to a youth group, when it comes as a standard for your way of looking at life. Right? And so when you become a consumer and you bring that to not just in purchasing things, but when you bring that into your everyday situation, into your life, it can become pretty crazy and unhealthy. It's individual who's quick to judge and compare. Obviously, there's a stark difference. So if I look at that, just that list, I don't know about you, but I want to be an investor group. I don't know if somebody says, you know what? Well, maybe, but maybe today you find yourself in a consumer group. I don't know. But at some point, I realized in my life that I was more of a consumer than I was an investor. Especially when it came to my family. I've been married for more than 20 years now, but there was a period of time where I was a consumer in that relationship. Right? When I got married, I thought, I got married because I wanted to be happy. And I thought that marriage and my wife's going to bring me happiness. And when things didn't go as I thought, right, there was some questions. And so, I'm a sports guy. I like to play sports. So it was not uncommon for me to say, all right, I worked hard. I went to church. I went to choir. It's my time to go play soccer, right? For example. But I never realized at some point that I've not given what my wife needs. I only was concerned, about my needs. I wanted to meet my needs first before I was considering what my wife's needs are. That's being a consumer at that point. Right? And so, when I looked at these illustrations, it really opened my eyes. And I started looking at my own life and I'm thinking, is there areas in my life that I act like a consumer? Or am I naturally gravitating towards being an investor? Right? And so, if you ask me the question, I want to be an investor. I want to be able to come to a group of people, whatever that may be. It could be at work, it could be just a friendship, it could be a relationship, obviously my family, church, youth, whatever I may find myself, I want to be an investor. I want to look to help, to be helpful, to be unselfish, and to put others first. Right? Obviously, it's not easy, and it's a long life's battle. And hopefully, we can grow in that as well. We can grow in that as well. So when we start talking about opportunities, investment in opportunities, I want to pause there, just a blank there, because I want to tie that into my own personal testimony. So I stopped at a point where, at 12 years old, I lost my father. And moving to the United States, it was difficult. It was difficult. And when we moved to Indiana, I was 14 years of age, graduating 8th grade, starting high school. I knew that single mom cannot afford me a car. I knew that if I wanted one, I had to go to work. So at not quite 15, I started a job in dishwashing, as I remember, say $4.75 an hour. I was determined to pay my way to get a car. But like I said, God had different plans. At that job, I met somebody who is much older than I, an individual that was working at the same place. His name was Bill Solomon, and he was a married man who had no children. And we became friends. Looking back, I can't imagine how my mom would allow a 15-year-old to hang out with a man that's 40-year-old, that she couldn't communicate, she didn't know who he was, and like I wouldn't allow my child to do that. But again, God had His plan. And so I met this gentleman, Bill Solomon, and I got to know him. We got to spend a lot of time together. And first it was just once in a while after work, we'd go to a basketball game or something, or we'd go out to eat. It became a habit, it became a norm where I would just hang out at their house every day, after school, after work. Mom didn't drive at the time, so I'd get picked up by him and we'd just hang out. And really, it was kind of a mutual relationship. However, I started abusing it. I realized that he didn't have any kids, and he wanted some kids, right? And so he was reaping the benefits of having somebody who's a teenager that wasn't his, but yet we got really close. And so in his mind, he was that relationship to where he almost called me his son, right? And I knew how much he appreciated me, how much he loved me, so I started abusing it, right? Like, if I wanted a Nike shoes, I got a Nike shoes. If I wanted to go to Chicago Bulls to watch a basketball game with Michael Jordan, I got to go to Chicago and watch the Bulls game. And if I wanted to go to Indianapolis Colts, I went to Indianapolis Colts. Whatever I wanted, per se, within reason, he wasn't that wealthy, and he had to work hard to be able to buy things that I wanted, right? But he invested in me. The biggest thing he gave me is time. He taught me how to pronounce certain words that I struggled with. He inspired me to go to college. That today opened the door for me to be a GM at a level that I never thought possible. To run a plant that's got 270 employees that I had no business in running. But today that's where I am. Because somebody took time out of their life and invested in me. Right? Now that relationship not just stopped and just financial gains for me. Right? And so, again, he was a married man. He lived at home with his mother and his sister. His sister wasn't married. And again, they're in their late 40s, right? And they're investing in me. Who would have told him that at some point his mom's going to die, his wife died, he's now by himself. Right? And it's interesting that when somebody took time and opportunity to invest into a young man, a teenager, that at some point that individual can reap the benefits like Bill today. For instance, he's got a home. He can come to my house anytime he wants to. He doesn't have to call. He doesn't have to knock. My kids call him Grandpa. Right? And so you can see that an investment into a young man can be reaped 20 years down the road because you don't know what awaits you 10, 15, 20 years down the road. Does that make sense? Like you don't know what's going to wait for you tomorrow. And God gives you this opportunity, and I wanted to inspire you because you don't know what tomorrow's going to bring. Right? And so, that's my testimony. I'm sure if I asked you, you would have simple testimony, just even a small details maybe in high school, your family, your friends, where somebody took the opportunity to invest in you, right? And you reap the benefits at the time. But really what inspires when you can do the same thing for somebody else, right? And so, again, that's my testimony. But it didn't stop even there. They were a Catholic family. And so as we got to know each other, you know, I had questions like, why do you pray to Virgin Mary? Why do you do that? And he would be baffled that he couldn't answer my question. He goes, well, how do you know this stuff? I go, I read the Bible. And he says, well, what church do you go to? And so we had a First Baptist church and an American church here. And I said, you got to go to that church. I said, you got to stop going to Queen of Peace Catholic Church because you're not reading the Bible. They're speaking Latin over there. You're not getting anything. You got to go to this church. He started going to that church. There's a pastor that invested, again, we're talking investment. There's a pastor, they had 5 pastors at the time, and this was one of the assistant pastors. He spent a year coming to their house every Wednesday to the Bible study. Into this family. For a whole year, every Wednesday, he came to the Bible study. Out of that Bible study, his mom came to Christ, Bill was baptized, and Bill's wife, who was baptized prior, has recommitted herself. They became members of the First Baptist Church. To me, that's amazing. To me, that, you know, if you ask Bill, he says, you know, how is it possible that a kid out of Ukraine could come to the United States, could come to Indiana, could come to Elkhart, to meet me, to preach me about Jesus, and now we can be one family. You can't make that up. Like you can't. God has a plan, right? And so, I wanted to share that because I think these investment opportunities, don't miss them, right? And what are they? And we could probably have a lot of them, but I wanted to really focus on just 4. First one is invest in yourself. Like, you know, sometimes I talk to some of you and I go, you know, what do you want to do in life? Oh, I don't know, yeah, I don't know. Are you going to go to school? I don't know. Again, school's not for everybody. And I'm not saying that somehow you're less if you don't go get education. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is have a plan. Have a plan that whatever life choices you're going to make, that you invest in yourself, you grow. You grow spiritually, right? Like 2 Peter, the Bible calls us. But grow in the grace and knowledge of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. To Him be glory both now and forever. Amen. So, growth. We're talking growth in your knowledge, growth in wisdom, growth in faith. Right? Because if only growth you're going to have is financial gains, you know, you're going to get education, you're going to make a lot of money, you're going to live well, and it ends there, you can't take that with you. And somebody says, nobody takes a U-Haul to a cemetery. It doesn't go, right? So if all your growth is just to get ahead and financially based, you're missing out, right? And so when I say invest in yourself, grow spiritually. So when somebody does come to you with a question, well, how do you know that? Or what do I do? Well, this is my life, and this is the mistakes I make. How do I fix it? You can guide somebody to something that's more important than even financial gains. You can be a testimony, but if you haven't grown yourself, if you don't know Christ, if you haven't been saved, you obviously can't do that, right? So grow, invest in yourself, grow. 1 Corinthians, brothers, do not be children in your thinking, but be infants in evil, but in your thinking be mature. Right? Do not be children in your thinking. I must be missing something there. Probably a part of a verse or something. But in your thinking, be mature. And I really highlighted the mature. Be mature. You know, some adults aren't mature in their thinking. Right? The small things can set them off. But especially you guys. I mean, grow and become more mature. You know, humility. Romans 12:3. For by the grace given me, I say to every one of you, do not think of yourself more highly than you ought. but rather think of yourself with sober judgment in accordance with the faith God has distributed to each of you. Right? Some people you just can't talk to because they think they're better than everybody else. Right? That's not the personal growth that I'm talking about. That's not the investment that I want you to make. I want you to make investment in humility. Right? That's the biblical principle. You know, my daughter once says, you know, I don't have a table. So I made a little table for her. It's not big. It's about 3 foot by 4 foot. And on the side of it, you know, I asked one of the CNC guys at work, I said, can you, you know, take the fruit of the Spirit and just write all around the table so I can give her as a present. So when she looks at it, she can work on it, right? Because coming to Christ and say, you know what, I want to have fruit of the Spirit, it's not a download. It's not like taking a computer and downloading a program or an app and you got it. You got to grow in these things, right? You got to come in, you got to be in situations where you can grow love and joy and peace and patience, kindness and generosity, faithfulness, gentleness and self-control. But think about these things. Like, think about if you had some of that. Think about if you grew in some of that. What would your family look like? What would your relationship look like? What would your youth group look like? If we displayed some of these things. Like, if that was your goal, like, I need to grow in some of these things. Absolutely. I'm still growing in some of these things. And we can't perfect it until we come to heaven. But we can grow. Absolutely. So invest in these things. Invest in things that can make a difference and impact your life and the life of someone else. So, invest in yourself. And we could probably continue this list a lot further than what I just stopped there because I knew we're going to run out of time. Healthy relationships. Healthy relationships. Invest in healthy relationships. Like, if you have a friend that you know it's not going anywhere, quit wasting your time. Like, quit wasting your time. Invest in a healthy relationship. Do not be misled. Bad company corrupts good character. If you're in a group of guys and they're doing sinful acts, why are you hanging out with them? There's no reason for you to be there. You're not going to change them. Most likely they're going to change you. Okay? So, do not be misled. Bad company corrupts good character. Healthy relationship. Flee the evil desires of youth and pursue righteousness, faith, love, peace, along with those who call on the Lord out of pure heart. Again, flee some things, and we all need to flee some things that are hindering our growth and our healthy relationships. And then in friendship, you know, we talk about putting others first. Now, most of us will not have to lay down their life for a friend. But we may have to say, you know what, I may not like it, but I'll go with you. I may not want to, but I'll help you. How about starting there? Right? And you can even bring that down, you know, to your family down the road. You know, guys say, oh, I'm willing to die for my wife. I don't know who said that. Like, I'm willing to die. But you're not willing to take the garbage out. You're not willing to wash dishes. Right? And you may not have to die for your wife. But how about doing some things that would actually bring some joys for her? Right? And so, greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. Meaning, saying, is to say no to yourself and saying yes to someone else. Right? Especially to the loved ones. I mean, healthy relationships. Grow in healthy relationships. And I would say invest in healthy relationships. This one is a great one. Invest in church. You know, it pains me, guys, it pains me when I speak to young people and they say, you know what? Our church is just boring. I can't find anything to do there. I don't like it anymore. I'm going to go to this American church. There's nothing wrong with American churches. Get me. And I'm not against American churches. Some of them are great churches. But you all grew up in your local church. There are circumstances where maybe you should look for a different church. But that's not the majority of us. What I'm saying is invest in the church. So if you see a need, instead of criticizing, you know, help, be involved, right? And look at this. The righteous will flourish like a palm tree. Psalm 92. They will grow like a cedar of Lebanon, planted in the house of the Lord. They will flourish in the courts of our God. So there's a lot of people today, they don't even want to become members. They just want to be consumers. And you say, well, that's not right. Well, I'm telling you, if your church attendance is involved coming on Sunday, sitting for 2 hours, and leaving once a week, you're a consumer. That's all I'm going to tell you. If you're not involved in any kind of ministry whatsoever, you're just a consumer. And what happens with a consumer, they become a good critic. They're going to go to a different church, the worship is better. You know, the children's ministry is better. The preacher is better. What are you doing? You're judging and comparing. Right? You just became a consumer of church. And so what I'm asking you is, look at it. When we say planted in the house of the Lord, that means if you plant something, you can't just plant a tree and tomorrow move it to another location. Tomorrow you move it to another location. You can't. You're never going to get any kind of fruits off of it. Right? You can't just replant stuff. It's not possible. If you plant something, you need to give it time to grow, to shoot down roots, and to be invested in that location for you to produce anything. Well, the same is true for us. Right? We're called to be planted. Well, what is it like to be planted? What does it mean to be planted in the church? It means you give it your time. It means you give it your effort. It gives your finances. Right? You invested in that church. Your talents. That's what it means being planted. You're there. You're part of it. You're ready to help. Right? This one is really great one. Right? Proverbs 1:20. Whoever brings blessing will be enriched, and one who waters will himself be watered. There's an interesting illustration. We can take a water bottle, and you can see that I drank out of this water bottle, so there's space to put something back in. But let's pretend this bottle is full of water, right? And let's say you never give it to anybody, you never share it. You can't add anything into this unless you take some out, right? And so the problem in our life sometimes is we take everything in and we're so filled up. We go to church, and really we heard the message 100 times, but since we never shared it with anybody, there's nothing sticking anymore. We're full. We're never shared it with anybody, right? And so I'm calling you, like, if that's your experience today, water someone else. Share that. Be a help, right? Like, share your talents, your financing, your time with someone else. And you can be water. To me, this is awesome, right? And so another thing is, if you became a consumer in a church setting, and all you say, well, I know that in that church is so much better, or in this youth group is so much better, or this conference, whatever it is, and you start comparing, all those are great things. And all those are fruits in that church, but they're not your fruits. You're enjoying the fruits of somebody else's labor, right? You come to a church that's got amazing worship. You didn't put anything into that worship. Someone else did. Somebody else was planted and somebody else produced fruit. The question becomes, what have you done to make your church be more like that? That's the real question. Like, what effort have you put in to say, our worship is better? Now, it might be not to be the level, and you might not be in a worship team. You might be, just someone who can open a door in the morning and say, welcome to our church. We were in Florida once, and me and my wife walked into a church. There's like 7-year-old people opening doors, and they make us welcome. They just open the door and say welcome with a big smile on their faces. And we go, you know what? If someone could do it in our church, how great that would be. Just to open the door and say welcome. Welcome to our church. It doesn't take much effort, but it will put a smile on somebody else's face. That's what it means being invested in your church. Obviously with that church, one thing I want to point out, youth group. Right? Maybe some of you can't really or see yourself at that level, maybe, and maybe you should, but let's talk about youth group for a moment. Like, how do you view your youth group? Do you view that as it needs significant improvement? Is it's boring? Or do you view it as, I can help in some way? Like, are you invested in your youth group? Or are you just a consumer? For some reason, I don't know how it's your church, but like if comes New Year's Eve party, our list is full. I'm just telling you. There's 50 people, and I don't know where they all come from. But for a Bible study, or when we're trying to learn a song, for some reason, there's only 15 show up. Like, is that typical in your church too? I don't know. But it's typical in our church. Right? And I'm not degrading our church, I'm just speaking truth. I'm just saying that sometimes in our youth group, we become consumers. If it's a game night or free food or a volleyball, we show up. But when it's time to clean the bus or clean a youth group or help in church, we're absent, right? And so where do you see yourself and how do you apply yourself even in your own youth group? To me, that's huge, right? And so invest in your youth group as well. Obviously, your family. Or your family. Most of you came here with clothes. Some of you have a job that you bought yourself. Some of you haven't. And I'm sure at some point, if not today, a few years back, your parents provide everything for you. They make sure you have a roof over your head. They make sure you have a meal on your table, right? The Bible says, honor your father and your mother, and your days may be long in the land that the Lord your God has given you, right? It's a commandment. Love your parents. Honor your parents, I should say properly. Honor your parents, right? But also does not step. But if anyone does not provide for his relatives, and especially for members of his own household, is denied the faith and is worse than unbeliever, right? So at some point, you will have your own families. Invest in those families. Invest in your wife. Invest in your kids. Give them time. Right? Don't just bring a paycheck and say, yeah, I've done my job. Everything else is for me. No. Make sure that their tanks are filled. Right? Make sure, like for me, it's a struggle. Make sure that if we talk about the relationship, there's such thing as a book called 5 Love Languages, right? And for my wife, it's time. I can bring her the best present, and it'll never satisfy her. She wants my time. She wants my undivided attention, 20, 30 minutes, so she can talk about her day, issues, or whatever happened, right? She just wants time, right? For me, it's a lot easier to go buy flowers. Hey, honey, here's a bouquet of flowers, and I'm done. And this is really another topic, but when you invest in your family down the road, guys, invest it to where you understand, okay, your wife, your children, you give them what they crave, right? And so that's your responsibility. And we obviously talk about honoring your husband, loving your wife. Those are all biblical principles that you can apply for your own life, right? Obviously, if everybody applied this, we would not have as many divorces as we have today, right? If everybody did not have a consumer mentality and everybody had an investor mentality, we would have a lot less marital issues. We really would. We would have a lot less churches that are divided. We would have a lot less bickering in the youth group, where the youth group's divided into 10 different subgroups, right? Well, yeah, no, don't invite those persons because we want to be here. No, I don't get along with that person. Why? Because we acting like consumers. We put ourselves above those around us. And so, again, I just want to inspire that. All right, 3 types of investors. It's really easy and really basic. You can find in any financial background what type of investor: pre-investors, passive investors, and active investors. Pre-investors is really all of us. At some point, when we're born, when we can afford nothing from a financial standpoint, we're pre-investors. Right? We can't go buy any stocks. We can't invest in any corporation. We're in a category called pre-investors. If I bring it down to what we talked about today, it also is relative. Pre-investor is an individual who has no desire, no effort, gives no effort into investment of any kind, right? They can afford it, they don't want it, they don't take responsibility for it, they just don't care, right? It's pre-investor. Potentially, that group of people, if you talk to them, they'll say, you know what? Tomorrow, I will do it, tomorrow. Right? It's almost kind of like my diet. I always tell my wife, Monday I will start a diet, and then Monday comes around. Well, it's next Monday, right? So that's the pre-investor. Sometimes you come up to these youth groups and say, hey, can you help? Can you help? We need to decorate. No, I'm busy. Maybe next time, right? You've met those people. Maybe some of you are those people. Then you say, oh, next time I'll learn a poem, or next time I'll go and evangelize. Next year I'll go on a mission trip, right? There's always the excuse of, I'm not ready, it's next time. You're in a group of pre-investors. At some point, you need to graduate from that group, right? The next step is passive investor. This is the group that accidentally, if you're in a work setting, it's a company who's got automatic enrollment into 401k. Like, you didn't even fill out a form. Like, when you work there, you automatically can get enrolled. That's a group of passive investors, right? In our settings here, if you talk about spiritual investor, it's a group of people that always you have to talk them into things, right? Like, hey, come on, really, you promised it. Last time you said it was going to be next time. Come on, let's go. This time, you got to do it because you promised, right? They don't really display any initiative. You got to drag them along. You got to talk them into all the time. Like, hey, come on, let's do it. It's good. You can help us. That's the passive investor. You have to drag them along. Does it make sense? Right? So that's also And I'm sure you know some people that are passive investors, right? In youth group, in church, in your relationship, in your friends as well. And there's an active investor. Active investor is somebody who's seeking. They're actively seeking. So they see a need. They don't go tell and complain, oh, you know what, it could have been a lot better. They're doing something about it, right? They're actively seeking how to make things better. You know, if we're talking financial investor, obviously they take control of their own future as far as investing goes. They dive in, they do research, you know, they apply themselves. But it's the same thing in our setting as well. As a spiritual investor, actively searching to do things better. Where can I apply myself in an area where I'm at, right? So if it's in Minnesota, if it's in Indiana, or whatever else you guys come from, like, look at your situation. Look at your youth group. Look at your church. Look at your friendships. Look at your home. You know, if you're not married, and most of you are not, you know, you have your parents. Like, which one of these, you know, even simple, like cleaning the house or picking up after yourself or helping with dinner or whatever. Are you the pre-investor that always needs to be served? Mom, you know, my clothes is there, it needs to be washed. Or, hey, you know, there's nothing in the refrigerator, can you cook something for me? Are you a passive investor where, you know, somebody's got to punish you, like, I'm going to take your keys away if you don't do that. Like, you have a list of things to do and you're not getting it done, right? Or are you active investor? You come in and say, oh, Mom, I'm going to help you. Or, Dad, hey, what do you need help with? You actively searching to invest yourself and making it better, right? And so again, pre-investor, passive investor, active investor. Which one of you is the question today? So again, what category do you fall into? I don't know. I don't know most of you. For some reason, I can't remember most of your name unless you look at your tag, right? But it is real relative. So the end of the thing is, for my personal life, my testimony is this: that looking back, you know, I'm 40 years old today. Looking back, I never dreamed of a way that God's going to take me from a 12-year-old kid that lost his father, that can't speak a word of English, to 28 years later, have a family, 4 children, an ability to serve with the gifts and talents that God gave me. And I will tell you that I've never regretted it. I never regretted it for 10 years of going to Bible study. I never regretted it to go to a quiet practice. I never regretted it when I went to Costa Rica or Odessa or whatever else went with a mission trip. There's no regrets. You know, I can see those people. I can see, you know, we went, in 2016, we built a center in San Jose, a town called Los Guidos, to where we can get a mail today and say, you know, this is what we're doing with that center. We spent 17 days there with our youth group. There's 16 people. And we welded. I never welded so much in my entire life. But we were able to make an impact. You know, we went to Odessa and we had a great time visiting retirement communities or old people's homes and orphanages. I never regret that. I never regret just spending time with Bill and sharing gospel with him and looking back and see how much joy it brings him today to be a part of a church. Not only that, but to know that he's going to heaven. Like, there's no regrets. You see, if all my focus was based on financials and financial gains and how can I make more money, like, I would have a lot of regrets. Because ultimately, you know, I was working and for the longest time I wish I could travel. Like, you know, you hear all these people having cool trips, and at some point, God allowed me to taste some of that. You know, I started buying equipment for a company that I work for, and we got to travel. And I realized very quickly that there's only so many good restaurants you can go to. There's so many good places you can visit, or neat places you can visit. At some point, they all look the same and taste the same. At some point, you just want some regular home meal, and to just see your kids. You see, to me, it's tragic when you invest into something that, looking back, you can say, you know what? It's just money. Don't make that mistake. Like, invest in something that you can look back and you can feel good about. Invest in something you can look back and say, you know what? there's no regrets there because I was able to help somebody along. I made my youth group better. I impacted somebody. I shared the gospel with somebody. Or maybe it's simple as I open a door in church and put a smile on somebody's face. Right? It doesn't have to be grand. It starts with very little. But you can make an impact. Okay? So, I mean, that's really wraps up my topic, I guess, and my testimony. But again, if you guys have any questions or your thoughts or feedback, we got a few minutes. We got like 5 minutes. I'm open. I'm open to anything you guys want to discuss from that perspective. Where are you guys from? Maybe you can share some of that. In the back row over there. Where are you guys from?
Missouri.
Missouri? St. Louis?
Yeah. Minnesota.
Minnesota. I know you're Minnesota, yeah? Minnesota? Okay. Where you guys from again? Missouri?
St. Louis.
Minnesota. This is all Indiana. Colorado, all right. Oklahoma. Where are you guys from? Evansville? Where are you guys from? Indiana. Where are you from?
Sedalia, Missouri.
Missouri, that's right. Back row over there, Indiana.
Minnesota.
Minnesota. Yeah, Missouri. So,
Вопрос.
Yeah, пожалуйста.
Я занимаюсь молодежью, да, тоже Bible study. У меня было такое, то, что когда говоришь людям правду, они хотят приходить на Bible study. Что мне делать, чтобы люди приходили, молодежь? Уже Слово Божие.
That's an interesting question. Interesting question because we all battle that a little bit. Right? Ну, если мы возьмем our church, 40-50 youth Bible studies, typically 18, 20, 25. One thing that works for me or has worked in the past is trying to build a personal relationship. And it's very easy to come up to somebody and say, you know what, you're a sinner because you don't go to Bible study, or you're a bad person because you don't do certain things right. But for both of you, what works is a personal connection. If you can find that personal connection with someone, then you can rebuke, invite. But if there's not personal connection, it does not. I know that does not work. Right? Prayer, a lot of prayer works. And maybe ask the questions why. And sometimes the answer is not what we want to hear. But sometimes the true answers is what we need to hear. То есть, если спросить вопрос, почему можно получить ответ, может быть, кто-то ведет нехорошо его, может быть, quality level даже не поднятый, да, то есть, может, действительно там нехорошо ведется, то есть, not deep enough. То есть, some of those questions needs to ask, да, почему? And sometimes there's nothing wrong with the one that leads the Bible study. Maybe it's the individual or a group of friends that don't want to come. But all we can do is pray, have honest feedback. You know, я помню, такой был, я начинал проповедовать, and I was maybe 20 years old, and an individual came to me and says, Леня, копай поглубже. And that was it, right? And I took that note and I looked at it and I showed it to my wife. She's not here, so I can't say it. She says, well, that's just mean. That's not right. Nah. That's and I'm not saying she's wrong. She's like, well, that individual never talks to you, never this, never that. How can they say that to you? You're not, you know. And I looked and goes, honey, I said, it's okay. I said, there's something to this. Like, копай поглубже. I got to deep a little, you know, I got to dive in a little deeper. It's okay, right? And so sometimes the honest feedback is okay, even though we don't want to hear it. So if something's not going right, молодежь, это хороший вопрос. Right? If for instance, if you, in your youth group, if the Bible study is really not to the level and it could be better, be honest. Talk to the one that's leading. Don't just not stop showing up. Да? Правда? Лучше прийти сказать, listen, мы проходили там Евангелие от Иоанна, but у меня есть много вопросов, none of those are answered, we need to do better. Лучше получить такой feedback than just stop coming, right? So give an honest feedback. Now, don't do it degradingly. Don't do it in front of everybody. Whoever's leading the Bible study, say, hey, you know, pull them to the side and say, hey, this is how I'm feeling right now. And you know what? There may be some truth to that. Now, again, don't do it purposely to hurt somebody, but have an honest feedback. Да, вот, я думаю, вот такие вот пожелания, которые я могу сказать. Может быть, еще, пожалуйста.
Yeah, my question's kind of like along the same lines, but I was wondering like what's your advice for helping maybe people in our families or people we're in relationship with, like just to graduate from being a pre-investor or a passive investor, I guess, like just best advice on that.
So sometimes, I'll come back from the other side a little bit. So sometimes parents will come in and say, can you talk to my child because they're just not, they're not really involved in it. Right? There tends to be a link, usually. And it goes like this. If the parents serve and are involved, typically the kids will serve and be involved. Right? So it starts with you. Like, if you serve and get involved, more or less likely you can impact those around you, right? Now, again, sometimes there's nothing you can do. I know one thing for sure, you can't make somebody do something. Like, and I know those people that, or even parents sometimes, that every day, сын, тебе нужно покаяться, сын, тебе нужно покаяться, сын, тебе... And what happens is that person just closes off, and they're not interested, they're completely, they don't want to hear it. At that point, all you can do is pray, right? So it's better not to aggravate a person. You do the right thing. Once in a while, I will tell you one more story. So I used to run a plant in Elkhart, not too far here. Now I run one in Middlebury, and I had around 150 employees at the time. And I was moving to a different facility. And the gentleman that took after me, he calls me about a month later. He goes, "How did you have?" the GM signed the races for people. And I go, well, it's kind of easy. He said, well, hold on, let me finish. He says, well, can you tell me? I said, sure. I said, I'll tell you what, when you walk with your boss, with your GM through the plant, I said, point out the individual that does a really good job. So I said, hey, Mark's doing great. Did you see that? Did you see how he's doing his job? He's doing awesome. Or, Sophia is doing awesome. Look at that. Look how she's working. And so then 2 weeks later, fill out a requisition for a pay increase for Sophia and Mark, and I guarantee it will be signed. He called me a few weeks later. He goes, Leo, it works. So what happens sometimes, you just put a little drop of water. Sometimes you just gotta throw those. Hey, let's go do this. Hey, I think you'd be really good at it. For that individual, just plant those seeds a little bit. Like, don't pound it with a hammer. Hey, you're a terrible individual. You don't do anything. You're not even saved, Don't do that. Just plant it. Just water a little bit. Just water is able to break rock if it drips long enough, right? So just you do the right thing and plant and plant and plant. Eventually it'll come to fruition. That's my life. That's my experience.
So did you mean GM by general manager?
Yes, sir.
Oh, gotcha. I was going to ask a question too.
Sure.
So like, I'm running like an auto parts store on eBay.
Okay.
I'm like wondering, how do you deal with aggressive customers?
Oh, I don't know if I'm a good resource for that. Yeah. And unfortunately, in a retail business, customer is king, right? So you tread lightly, and again, honest feedback always is good, right?
So just be direct, I guess.
Well, and I say honest feedback. Sometimes direct doesn't always work.
Yeah, direct is already gonna just.
Right. So it's a situational thing, right? It's wisdom. It comes with experience. You're not going to have it overnight. So it's taking your past mistakes, dealing with the customers or people, learning from them, and applying them next time.
Yeah, because soon I have to fully manage it and to deal with that.
Yeah, working with people never easy. If you have any other questions, or I can help you with something. Bust.
So I come from a smaller church, and because of the lack of service, I guess, a lot of people I've seen invest too much into the church, and they get burnt out. And because they want to invest so much, it's hard for them to like give themselves grace and kind of back up. So how would you approach those people so that they realize that they don't have to take everything on themselves? Although it's good to invest, there is such a thing as like investing too much of yourself, you know?
I totally agree with you. This was a question that was true in my life, right? My wife came to me and said, Leo, you've gone too much. You know, we've got Bible studies, we've got mission trips, we've got church, you preach, you know, you're involved in choir, you've gone too much, right? Unfortunately, I received the message well. I understood where she's coming from. At times what happens is, it's cultural, really, right? The countries we come from, church took all priorities, right? That's how our parents were taught. That's how some of you I was taught. Church takes all priority. However, biblical principle is family church. That's the priority, right? Because the question always became, how can so many preachers / pastors, and why do that sometimes lose their kids, right? Is because they're serving here so much, they don't have time for their family or invest in their children. And unfortunately, sometimes, and tragically, not always, but sometimes. And so my advice to you is, again, it's a difficult one because it's a big barrier for our culture. It's a big barrier. But maybe have those, you know, some of the things is, even for our church here, we have 250 members. Certain things are struggling, right? Because either we invest too much or not enough, right? Where is that balance? And I think, and I don't know specifically what you're meaning, but having that honest conversation and the priorities are church or family church. You know, and just because we're going to have 3 services, that's going to make us more holy or more spiritual, right? When you're burned out, ultimately. And so it's understanding, it's really is wisdom, right? It's wisdom how to communicate, and it's wisdom how to build where you're not burned out. Right? At some point, you know, I passed on, for instance, the youth leadership because I just don't have time for it. And what happens is, when we're that stretched, it suffers because we can't give our 100% to it, right? So we're just treading water. We're really not moving. We're just kind of just the same level. I don't really have a good advice for you how to do that because I think it's very subjective and it needs to look at more deeper and into how big the church is, what specific areas the church burn itself out. But there's definitely a part of it saying that if you do more somehow, if you serve more, give more time to church, somehow it's going to make you holier, better, less sinful, and you're going to earn, right? But that's really not true, right? Because yes, we are called to serve. Yes, we are called, to give ourselves and to invest. But at some point, there's priorities, and you have to balance that. You know, I agree with you. It's not an easy solution for us. You know, when we look at American churches, a lot of pastors, right? A lot of people that take on worship leaders and whatnot, they're paid, right? So they don't have a full-time job and have to do a full-time church work, right? That's what happens. Unfortunately, we're not there, and we're struggling, and the smaller the church, the worse it gets probably, right? But really, it's the structure of the church that needs to change probably. Sorry, I don't have a concrete answer, but I understand you. I definitely understand you. So, okay.
How did you pass on your leadership? Like you said, you passed on your ministry, and how did you come up to them and talk to them?
Yes, that's a good one. So, for longest time, I took over a youth that, I'll probably should back up a little. When I came to Indiana, this was a brand new church. We've had no prior Ukrainian, Russian, or Slavic church here. And so, really, I missed out from 12 years of age to 18. I missed out. I was never part of any youth group. I grew up, it was just a few people here, a few families, and we had a service at 2 o'clock because that's where American Church allowed us to rent their building from 2 to 4, and then we played volleyball every night, every Sunday night, right? That's my youth experience. Right? There was any kind of Bible study, there was nothing. Right, and so, and then I got married, we had children, and so that structure was missing. For a while, we had an older pastor that was leading the youth group, and the youth group really was hemorrhaging. It was just there, nothing happening. So, Bratya proceeded, do you want to get involved? And I said, yes. So, for the next, really, about 5 to 8 years, I felt like I was giving my all, but there was nobody who was willing to step up and take the next step. And so, my commitment, though, was unwavering. Like, I knew that I can't leave that because there's no way to pass it on. Right? I was committed. And so, I think that was a big deal in my ministry. Like, I was committed to not leaving until God gives me someone who can take it. Right? And that was my prayer for a long time. And so, a few years back, we had a group of kids that moved from Sunday school to youth, and we identified 3 or 4 leaders that were graduated from pre-investors, right? And would sometimes you come up and say, hey, can you do this? Yes, so they're willing to grow and be involved, and we start meeting with them every week. And we would lay out an agenda. Okay, what are we going to do for next month with the youth? How are we going to do fundraisers? How are we going to do Bible studies? What does that look like? How are we going to do games or whatever? And I saw growth, and then I identified a couple individuals where I had more regular meetings with them, right? And so God blessed me with Daryl, and God blessed me with Wladimir, and God blessed me with other now that are behind them, that are stepping out. Do they all pan out? No. There's some individuals that didn't progress to that leadership role, right? But you know what? It's okay, because ultimately somebody came along and through maybe a period of 3 to 4 year transition, it wasn't like, okay, you have potential, you'll lead it tomorrow. It was 2-3 years of investment of maybe not every week, but weekly, monthly, quarterly meetings, and I slowly stepped away and gave them more responsibility as I stepped away, until I fully stepped away from the youth group, right? So there was definitely a transition period. But two things out of that. Be committed to yourself. Like, don't drop it because there's nobody behind you, because that commitment's everything, right? So be committed. So if you commit to something, don't overschedule yourself. Commit to something you can handle, right? So you don't get burned out. And be in there for a long haul. Or don't commit. Like, if you're not able to do long haul, like mentioning names, we had a trial of small groups that started with young families, right? And there was someone who said, okay, I'm going to do it. And 2 weeks in a row, very few people showed up. Like, you know what? We're just not going to meet because nobody's coming. We're done, right? So that perseverance was not there. And ultimately it fell apart. But so be committed, and then pray, and God will give you those individuals that can step behind you and have a transition period. Don't just end it like today. Right? Because potentially it's going to fail. Hopefully that answers your question. Anybody else? Well, I appreciate you guys coming. Hopefully you have taken something for yourself. If you wanted to come up and have a discussion down the road, I'll be around. And I'm sure we'll see you guys in other conferences if God gives us the opportunity as well. Can we pray together? Would that be good? How about any volunteers to finish in prayer again? Okay. Right.